Okay, we are learning Le'ilu Nishmas Mindel Mariam Bas Kal Merubin and Hashem Shem Aliyah. We're in the bottom of Kufla Mates Amud Beis. Okay, so we're going to touch upon Borer, we're going to touch upon Lisha, which is kneading, also prohibition on Shabbos, and taking medicine on Shabbos, so a whole bunch of different halachos that are going to all be mixed together today. So V'nostim Beitza B'Misanenis, the Mishnah which we saw yesterday said that you're allowed to put egg into a mustard strainer. Now, typically putting things through a strainer, if you want to get separate one thing from the other, typically is going to be a classic case of Borer. However, the Mishnah says you're allowed to put egg into a mustard strainer. So the Gemara asks, why is that? Or Gemara is addressing why that is. Tani Rav Yaakov Karcha. Rav Yaakov Karcha said, Lefi she'ein osin osa el legaven. Because the reason you're doing this is not because you're trying to separate one from the other, but rather you're just doing it for coloring purposes. In other words, if you were putting something through a strainer because you want to separate the white of the egg from the yolk of the egg, that's going to be prohibited because you're separating one thing from the other at the strainer, 100% not allowed. But over here, your entire function is not because you want to eat one over the other, but rather they're both going to be eaten, but rather you just want to have the yellow going onto the mustard. Apparently that's how they made the mustard look even more brightly yellow. They would add some coloring, and the coloring they used was natural color of egg yolk. That is going to be allowed because you're not separating it because of taking good from the bad or one from the other, but rather you're doing it, you're going to eat both, you're going to take both, it's just that you want to have the yellow on the bottom, and that is therefore permitted. Okay? Itzmar. Now since we're talking about mustard, we're going to go and discuss lisha. Lisha is a prohibition against kneading. Now, kneading was one of the steps is one of the steps of making bread. So typically, when we think of kneading, we're thinking of taking something which is a solid, mixing with a liquid, and making it into a doughy type substance. And the Mishnah over here is going to talk. Now, it's not only limited to bread, or wheat, anytime, or flour. Anytime you're going to go ahead and knead two items, a hard item and a liquid item, and make them into a dough is going to be included in this prohibition. And we're going to see some extensions of this prohibition. So, chardal shalashim erev Shabbos. We have mustard, which was kneaded before Shabbos. Okay, so mustard, the way they make mustard is that they would take the mustard seeds, they would have a little bit of liquid that was either naturally developed by the seeds themselves. The seeds themselves create some moisture, and therefore there was initially some kneading. Some suggest they added some water before Shabbos, but one way or another, it's already been made into a dough-like substance. Lemachar, the next day, even after it was already made into some form of a dough-like substance, Amarav, mimacho bechli avalo bayad. When you mix it, you want to mix the next day, you want to mix the mustard, you're allowed to mix this mixture by adding some water and then mixing it in with the utensil, but not with your hands. Okay, you can mix it with the utensil and not with your hands. Amrlei Shmuel, bayad. So what is the implication? The implication is he's saying this, by doing it, you're doing it with a bit of a shinoi. In other words, doing it with a utensil and not by your hands is doing it with a shinoi. So again, it's already a dough-like mixture. To create the dough-like mixture at the outset, that's certainly not allowed. So we're talking about someone who already has a dough-like mixture. You want to make it even more dough-like, or make it more of a mixture. So the next day you want to add some water and mix it further. So you're only allowed to do so with a shinoi. What's the shinoi according to Rav? A utensil, not your hands. Now, obviously, he's of the opinion that using your hands is something which, as we know, mixing with your hands, as dirty as it is, as messy as it is, I should say, at the end of the day, it gets into a much better type of mixture. So he says, therefore, you can do it with a utensil and not with a hand. Okay? Amalei Shmuel, bayad. It's prohibited to use a hand. Atu kol yom machal bayad. Does normally use the hands on other days? Machal chamarmu. Are you making food for a donkey? In other words, he says that's how you make food for a donkey. But people use a utensil. That's the normal thing to do. So don't tell me that the abnormal thing, the shinoi, is to do with a utensil. That's the normal thing to do. Shmuel therefore says, you do it in an abnormal fashion, i.e. you do it with a hand and not with the utensil. They're both agreeing to do it with the shinoi. The question is the shinoi a utensil or is the shinoi a hand? Okay? We're going to see a number of opinions. We'll see ultimately how we rule. Itzmar. Rabbi Elazar Omer. Rabbi Elazar says, echad zev echad zeh aser. Both mixing with a hand and mixing with the utensil are both prohibited. For Rabbi Yochanan Amar, echad zev echad zeh mutter. Rabbi Yochanan takes the opposite extreme. He says both hand and utensil are allowed. So far we have this whole spectrum. One saying everything is allowed, one saying everything is forbidden, and then you have Rav and Shmuel in the middle saying the shinoi is not allowed. The shinoi is allowed. The question is, what is the shinoi? Okay. Abai and Rava come along and say the lacha does not follow Rav Yochanan, and further, come Rav Yochanan b'shitasid Rav Elazar. Apparently Rav Yochanan went back on his view, and he agreed to the view of Rav Elazar and said that adding mixture into this mustard mixture, adding water into this mustard mixture is you cannot mix it whether with utensil or with your hands, like Rav Elazar. Come Rav Elazar b'shtas de Shmuel, and Rav Elazar subsequently took up the view of Shmuel that said it's permitted by hand but not with the utensil. Okay, Abai v'Rav Damar Tavayu halacha kirav Yochanan. The halacha is like Rav Yochanan, who prohibits mixing liquid into mustard in any fashion. Okay, so bottom line is that is how we rule that adding. And there's more to say about lush, and I think where the Gemara is going to later on get back a little bit into lush. It's a bit of a complicated halacha, like making porridge, making oatmeal, anything of that nature on Shabbos is going to be included in the prohibition of lush. Where the Gemara lands right now is that even if it's already somewhat mixed, if you're adding liquid, you cannot. You can maybe add the liquid, as we'll see, but to mix it in any strong fashion, let's hold off. The Gemara is going to detail this a little bit more, and we'll see it from the Gemara. Abaya's mother once made him mustard by mixing the liquid into it on Shabbos, and he did not eat it. Devisu de Zeira, the wife of Zeira, Avda leila Rav Chia bar Ashi v'lo achal. He once prepared this for Rav Chia bar Ashi by mixing liquid on Shabbos. He didn't eat it. Amrle, she said to him, L'rabach avidile v'achal. I made it for your teacher. She was Zeiri's wife. And said, I made this for your teacher. And he ate it, and you're not going to eat it. You, the student, not going to eat it. What's wrong with you? Yes?
Why is the Gemara talking about mustard rather than talking about flour?
Apparently, mustard was, this was a common type of substance, and it's going to be kol shekain, meaning if it's true for mustard, which is not making bread, it's certainly going to apply to bread. And we have to be talking about mustard because we're talking about the separating, and that's why we're going on this tangent. But, yeah. Amar Rava bar Shaba. And clearly, from these stories, eating mustard was quite common, right? Meaning you have all these stories of people doing this and making this. This was done. Amar Rava bar Shaba havkeimna kamei de Ravina uvachshi le b'shuvsa de suma v'achal. I was standing before Ravina and I stirred for him with a stalk of garlic. Okay, and he ate it. So obviously it's a very abnormal. You don't normally stir with a stalk of garlic, but in the same type of case, and he did eat it. Amar Mazudra le selchasa b'chol hani shmaitza. Ramar Mazudra comes along and says all of the above teachings are incorrect. We don't rule like any of the above teachings about lush. Ela kiyada itma. Rather, we rule like the following statements. Chardol shalosh me'av Shabbos. We have mustard which was mixed before Shabbos began. Lamachar machu bein beyad bein mechli. The next you're allowed to add water and mix it, both either by hand or by utensil. Okay. Important caveats. Next page 148 too. You're also allowed to add honey to it. Fine. And here's the most important part. You're not allowed to beat the mixture, but rather you're allowed to stir it. Okay. So basically, what comes out, what the way he lands, the way we rule a halacha is that when you have these types of mixtures, it's already mixed, and you're just making it, adding some more liquid to it. So what you're allowed to do is mix it lightly. Okay, so the question, the post can talk about how do you define light versus not. Some say you're allowed to make like go back and forth, like just kind of like tic-tac-toe board, like whatever, just going like this across and back and forth. But to start mixing it in any way is going to be problematic. That's already going to get into the issue of lush. Okay, so we're going to hopefully come back and discuss it a little bit more in halacha. Okay, shachalayim, but that's the basic principle. You're allowed to add to already created mixture. If you want to make it into more of a doughy mixture, you're allowed to add water to it, but you can't mix it thoroughly, vigorously. You're allowed to mix it very lightly, and typically that means just going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. That would be allowed. Okay, related rulings. Shachalayim shachar me'av Shabbos, cress. Okay, which was chopped from before Shabbos. Next, you're allowed to add oil and vinegar. And add amisa into it. We'll see what amisa is. And once again, you're not allowed to beat it, but you're allowed to stir it. So here we're talking about something which did not have liquid in it at all. Now we're saying you're even allowed to add the liquid on Shabbos. Okay, and it creates it into a bit of into like a dough-like substance, but you can't mix it all. You pour it in, and then you could just like go back and forth without really mixing it thoroughly. Shum sheritzkor of Shabbos, garlic, which is ground up before Shabbos. You're allowed to add beans or split beans. Velo yishchok el ma'arev, but again, you can't pound the mixture. You can't really mix it thoroughly, but rather you could just stir it. Okay, so anything which is going to make a dough-like mixture, you can't go ahead and really mush it together, but you'll be allowed to lightly combine them together. Okay. The prohibition of lush, by the way, is only when things are really mixed together into making it into like a doughy type substance. Like if you mix, like cocoa powder into milk, that's not a dough-like mixture, right? That's just making it into a liquid. You're just mixing something into a liquid. It's only, or adding, salad dressing to a salad. Also, it's not making it into dough-like mixture. Again, it's more like porridge, oatmeal, things of that nature. That's when you run into this issue. Okay. Va'osin animlan, I missed. Okay, so the Gemara said you're allowed to add amisa into the mixture. My amisa, what is amisa? Ninya, mint, like nana. Amar Abaye, shmamina hay ninya ma'al sachle. So we see from here that mint is good for a cress dish. It improves the flavor. Okay, so just a little like recipe tidbit in the middle of the Gemara. It says, you see from here, the fact that it's done, clearly mint is good for this dish. Okay. V'osin inomlin b'Shabbos. You're allowed to make inomlin. Mishnah concluded by saying you're allowed to make inomlin on Shabbos. And as we'll see, inomlin is something which has medicinal health, has health benefits, but it's also something which was done and eaten by healthy people as well. And as we discussed earlier on, if something is eaten by healthy people, then it's not included in the general prohibition of making medicine or using medicine on Shabbos. So even right, if something is eaten by healthy people, that's allowed. A nimlin is one of those things. So Tanur Rabban, the Gemara goes into the detail about what are the ingredients here. Osin animlin b'Shabbos and osin luntis. You're allowed to make an inamlin. You're not allowed to make a luntis. Okay, vezia nomlin vezia luntis. Which is which? So a nomlin, the thing which is permitted, yain udvashu pilpulin. It's made of wine, honey, and pepper. A luntis, and again, that's eaten by healthy people, and therefore you're allowed to make it on Shabbos. Aluntis yain yashan ma'im slun v'afarsimon. Aluntis is old wine, clear water, and balsam. Da'avdile masusa lemekar, which is made to cool off those who use the bathhouse. Okay, this was done in somewhat of a medicinal purpose, and therefore not allowed to be made on Shabbos. After they go to the bathhouse, then what would happen is that your body would be very hot, and they would cool you off by having this drink, and it was seen as like somewhat of a medicinal thing, not something which was done on Shabbos. Amar Rav Yosef says a story about this. Zimnachada alis basar mar ukva levei bane. I went with Mar Ukva to the bathhouse. Ki nafki asai ashkian chamar chad kasa. When I came out, he brought me a cup of wine to drink. V'chashim binsa dereshi v'atzufar k'dechari, and it cooled me off from the hair of my head to the nails of my feet. Okay, v'ashkian kasa achrina havi mistafina dilma menakuli mischusa da'amad asay. And if I had a second cup, I would have thought that I lost all my reward in the world to come. So the Rishonim talk about what is he talking about. So either that he would cool him off too much, and he would need a merit from Shemayim to ensure that he wouldn't die because it would be too cooling, or it was so pleasurable that he was afraid too much pleasure, and to have the hot bath and then you have it cooling off, and that's so gishmak, it's so great that he'd be afraid that he would lose his merits in the world to come because it was too good. Okay, ask Gemara. But Mar Ukva drinks this every day. Obviously, it's not that big of a deal. Shani Mar Ukva de dashpe. Once you become accustomed to it, you lose its. Let's just go with the second approach. He was afraid he's going to lose his reward in the world to come because it's so much pleasure. So Mar Ukva, if you do this every day, it doesn't have that type of pleasure. It's right. If it's novel to you, then for you it's going to have that pleasure. But if it's something which is not novel to you, it's not. Then it doesn't have that same effect. Okay. Fine, let's go. Next Mishnah. Ein shosin es a chiltis before you're not allowed to soak asa. I don't know how to pronounce this. Chiltis. I don't know how to pronounce it. Asa fetida. That's definitely not how you pronounce it. Okay. Definitely not it. Okay, it's basically a gum resin, which has a bitter taste. You're not allowed to soak it in warm water. The Gemara will explain why not soon. You're allowed to put it into vinegar. Here we get back into borer. You're not allowed to make vetches float, nor are you allowed to rub them. Okay, so what this means, and this is very relevant to halacha, is that if you have something which is you have a fruit or vegetable which is going to be mixed with some dirt. So one way of cleaning it is you soak it in water, and what happens? The dirt floats to the top, sometimes to the bottom, whatever it is, and that is a form of borer, and you're not allowed to do that, right? So anytime you're going to be soaking something, if it's something which doesn't have any noticeable dirt, okay, so meaning there's a whole question about, are you even allowed to put a fruit under your sink? Let's say you have an apple, you want to have an apple, so you put it under the sink, you're allowed to wash it off. You're washing off the dirt, right? Similar to this idea of soaking. So the post is going to say if it's something which has no noticeable dirt, then just putting it under the sink, then it's just something you do for cleanliness, for germs, then it's something which is allowed. But if you're soaking fruit, soaking vegetables, which is going to bring about noticeable dirt, cannot be done on Shabbos. Okay, and that we learn from this Mishnah. Okay, nor allowed to rub them to separate them either. You're allowed to put them into a sieve or a basket, and not in order to strain them, but to carry them. Right? They had limited utensils back in the day. So if let's say you put it into something which would cause some level of separation to happen, but it's not your intention. You're going ahead, you want to move something from place A to place B, and in the process, some of the bad stuff is going to fall away. That's fine. In Korvanas Tevin Bechvara, you're not allowed to sift straw, again, with a utensil which is used for sifting. Nor are you allowed to place it onto a high place, which will cause the shaft to drop from it. So again, you're allowed to use a sifter in order to pour into a feeding trough. In other words, you're allowed to use these utensils if your intention is not to separate, even though in the process some separation will happen. So again, nowadays not so relevant because we have enough utensils to carry things. But if all you have is a strainer and you're using it to carry something, and in the process some of it's going to be separated, that's okay. Ask the Gemara, Ibailuhu, Sharamai. Let's say a person did soak this vegetable in warm water.
It's like using a hammer to open up walnuts on Shabbos, right?
Yes, klishmach l'isser. It's a little different. There it's more of a muksa. It's even easier there because there it's a matter of muksa, and with muksa, here we're running into a potential biblical prohibition, right? Again, muksa is the least of the problems, because it's Rabbanan. But over here, you're running into a biblical prohibition, but because it's not your intention, it's allowed. Okay, Ibailu, ask the Gemara, Sharamai. Let's say a person did go ahead and soak the vegetables in, this vegetable in warm water. What's the halacha? Biblical prohibition, rabbinic prohibition. Tagmar of Ada, Narsha, Kamed of Yosef, Shara Chayev Chatas. You are Chayev Chatas. Okay, it's biblically prohibited. If you soaked raw meat in water, would you be liable midaraisa? In other words, he does this. We saw a similar question earlier. He basically asked like a case where, of course, if you soak meat in water, you're not going to be chayav chatas. He says, so why are you soaking a vegetable? Meaning, it's just his way of saying you're definitely not chayav chatas. He says it's only rabbinic. It's not a full-fledged borer. It's a rabbinic prohibition. He says it's a form of uvda dechol. That the reason that you're not allowed to, again, there's two cases. The first case was asaf. I don't know, pronounce it still. I'm going to use the Hebrew word. Chiltis. You're not allowed to put chiltis in. There's no separation taking place, right? There's no separation. Just like you're softening it. And there he says you're not allowed to do, and the Mishnah said you're not allowed to do so. He says it's not biblical. The only issue is rabbinic. As we'll see soon, the rabbinic issue is that it's medicinal. It's something which was done for medicine, and that's why he's saying it's like uvda dechol. It's something which you can't do on Shabbos because it's only done for medicinal purposes, and therefore it's in the category of a weekday activity. Okay, Bamini Rabbi Yochanan Rabbi Yanai. Okay, so we said you can't put it in warm water. What about cold water? It's also prohibited. How can you say that? Our Mishnah said you can't put it in warm water. And the implication is cold water is fine. So why are you saying it's usher in hot water? Let's look at Rav Yana's answer. Rav Yana says to Rav Yochanan, if I don't have a good answer for you, then what's the difference between me and you? Okay, it's pretty like audacious thing to say, but basically he's saying, you're asking me the question, you clearly recognize that I'm more knowledgeable than you, and I give you an answer, and then you're shooting me down from the Mishnah. He says, what, you think I don't know the Mishnah? Right? Basically he's like just pushing back, okay? He's saying, of course I know the Mishnah, but our Mishnah is a minority opinion. How do I know that? There's a brisa which you, my friend, don't know about, right? What's the brisa? The brisa, Rav Yana says to Rav Yochanan, says, the Tana Kama says, the Chacham say you can't do it in cold or hot. Cold or warm. It says you can't do either one, and that's where it's coming from. And it's Rav Yossi who says, Rav Yossi Omer b'chamen asur b'tzonon mutter. It was Rav Yossi who says it's only not allowed in warm water, but in cold water it's permitted, and therefore our Mishnah is only going like Rav Yossi. The Brisa teaches us that he's a minority view and not the majority view, and that's why I told you can't do so. Lamai Avdilei asked the Gemara, why do they make this mixture? Liyukra deliba. They make it for heaviness of the heart. In other words, it's a medicinal type of thing. Rav Acha bar Yosef chash b'yukra deliba. Rav Acha bar Yosef once had heaviness of the heart. Okay, asked the Gemara bar Ukva. He came to Bar Ukva. Amalei zil shtei tlasa tikle chiltasa b'slasa Yomi. Drink 3 gold dinners weight of this chilta over the course of 3 days. Okay, so each day have like 1 dinar's worth in order to have a portion for 3 days. He had it on the 5th day. He had it on Thursday. He had it on Friday, and then it's Shabbos. And now he's wondering, am I allowed to take medicine on Shabbos? He went to the base medrash to ask, is he allowed to have it? Amalei tanavei Rav Ada, Amalei tanavei Mar Bar Rav Ada. Shosa Adam Kavo Kabayim Ve'enu Choshesh. There is an opinion that says you're allowed to drink this stuff on Shabbos without any prohibition. So certainly you can rely on this more lenient view. You're somewhat ill. You had heaviness of the heart. You can rely on the lenient view and have it on Shabbos. Amalei Rav Achar also said to them, Lishtos lo kamibayle. I wasn't asking if you're allowed to drink it. Ki kamibayle lishtos mai. What I was asking is, are you allowed to make it on Shabbos? You're allowed to soak it on Shabbos. That was the question I had. Amalahu Rav Chia bar Avin b'didi hava uvda. Rav Chia bar Avin said to Rav Achar bar Yosef, I have an answer for you because the same thing happened to me. I was in the same situation. Vasai shiltul Rav Ada bar Hava. I asked Rav Ada bar Hava. V'lo hava b'day. He didn't know the halacha. I asked shiltul Rav Huna. I went to Rav Huna. Amar, he told me, Hachi Amarav shar b'tzonim naniach b'cham. You're allowed to put it in cold water, which we saw a minority view. According to one view, was allowed. But you really want to warm it up, so what do? Put it in cold water and then put it outside. Put it outside in the heat, and it's going to warm it up. Kamandashari. So the Gemara asks, was Rav going like Rav Yossi, like the Tana of our Mishnah, who said you're allowed to put it in cold water? Remember, we pointed out it was machlokes. Right? Was he going like the Tana of our Mishnah, who said you're allowed to put it in cold water? The Gemara says no. Afilamanda Amar Aser. Even according to the one who says it's Aser, meaning meaning the Tanakama, the Bryce we cited earlier, which we said the halacha really goes like, this is only to go from the beginning, to start the beginning of the process. And once you already started the process, Thursday and Friday, if you don't continue the medicine regimen, then it actually could be dangerous to you. You might like relapse, and therefore, if you didn't start yet, okay, it's one thing. But if you already started, to stop now, that's actually more dangerous, and therefore you're even allowed. Even the Chachamim would allow you to soak it at the get-go. Okay, another story. Mistamich Mazor Rav Acha bar Yosef Yakasved Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak bar Achte. Rav Acha bar Yosef was once leaning on the shoulder of his nephew Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Amalei Rav Acha bar Yosef said, Kimatzina levei Rav Safra Aline. When we get to the house of Rav Safra, bring me in. Okay, so obviously he's an older man. He says, help me get to the house of Rav Safra. Kimatzu Aile. When he got to the house, he was brought in by Mine. And Rav Acha bar Yosef asked Rav Safra, Ma lechas kusei ki tanisa b'shabsa. Are you allowed to rub freshly cleaned linen shirt on Shabbos? Okay, so there is a prohibition against laundering, and that's where this question is coming. Is this a form of laundering to me to rub this thing? So rakuche ki tanisa kamechavin b'shaberdami. Am I allowed to? Because all I'm doing is I really want it to be soft. I want it to feel nice and cozy when I and therefore I'm rubbing it for make it soft. Odilma lo lode chivar kamechavin maser. Or do we say that a person's just doing it to make it brighter, to rub it thoroughly is makes it brighter, and therefore it'd be prohibited because it would be a form of laundering. If we could assume the person is doing it just to soften the shirts, and therefore it's allowed. Like when Rav Yosef left the house of Rav Safra, Asa Amalei, Rav Nachman Yitzchak, his nephew, said, "My bar mine. What did you ask of Rav Safra?" Amalei said to him, "Bar mine la ma'al kitanis b'Shabbos." I asked him about rubbing a freshly clean linen shirt on Shabbos. Amalei Shaper Dami said to me, "It's mutter." The nephew asked him, "It's Yibalei lamar sudara. Why did you ask about a kerchief?" The kerchief that they wore on the head, right? Arab countries, they wore like some turban or a kerchief on the head. Why did you ask about that? Why are you asking about a shirt? So he says, he says, I don't have a question about a kerchief. Because I know that, because I already asked this to Rav Huna, and he said it's usher. Because by so he said, if you know that it's usher to rub a kerchief, why don't you assume it's the same thing for a shirt? Amalei, Rav Acha explains, when it comes to a kerchief which you see on their head, which is put on the head, and everyone sees it, we could certainly assume that a person is doing it to make it bright, because that's something which is very seen by all, and you want to make the things which are most evident, most showy, make those very bright. So if you're rubbing your kerchief, we know you're doing it to make it bright, and that's why it's usher. The shirt was worn under a jacket, under some other things, and therefore we don't assume that you care to make your shirt very bright, and therefore there was understood that maybe there's a difference, and indeed there was a difference. There we could assume it was done to make the shirts feel good and not for other reasons. Okay. That was a long Amud. Okay, we'll stop here and we'll pick up tomorrow. Have a great day.